NPR's and All Things Considered. She writes a monthly column for the Chicago Sun-Times. Her work has been published in the Chicago Sun-Times, Essence, Ebony, the Chicago Tribune, New York Times, and the Washington Post. She's also the author of The South Side, A Portrait of Chicago and American Segregation, winner of the 2016 Chicago Review of Books Award for Nonfiction, and a BuzzFeed Best Nonfiction Book of 2016. We also have Evan Moore. He's the Chicago Public Schools press secretary and the co-author of the book, Game Misconduct, Hockey's Toxic Culture and How to Fix It. His work, which consists of the topics of the intersection of sports, media literacy, race, politics, violence, and culture, has been featured in the Chicago Sun-Times, Rolling Stone, Chicago Magazine, the Chicago Reader, and the Bleacher Report, just to name a few. His work was also featured in the 2019 edition of the Best American Sports Writing book series. Evan's also the vice president of print for the National Association of Black Journalists, Chicago chapter. And lastly, we have Gary Cole, who's a retired attorney and theater producer, and the author of Newsboy, a childhood memoir that revolves around his Chicagoland paper route during the turbulent late 1960s and early 1970s. Newsboy is a prequel to his first book, Artless, which was written in the aftermath of the George W. Bush administration withdrawing his appointment to run the annual grants program at the National Endowment for the Arts. He's also written a novel, Black Box. And Gary is generously donating the proceeds from Newsboy to the Chicago Headline Club in honor of one of his boyhood heroes, Mike Royko. So thank you, Gary. And I want to thank you all for being with us tonight. I'm going to start with that first moment you decided, okay, we all have that time where we're thinking, you know, I have a story to tell. But actually sitting down and deciding I'm going to turn this into a book. Because I have a story to tell. How do you get to that point where you want to write a book? Gary, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I was kind of left with no choice. I ended up writing my book out of personal trauma. I was sort of at my wit's end after this NEA debacle. And so I sort of needed to write the book as a form of therapy. So I sort of had to carve out time in order to maintain my sanity. I was practicing law at the time, and I had 2 young kids, so it required a lot of early morning writing and before breakfast. But it was sort of a compulsion in my case.
That's so sad, and it just makes you very frustrated.
Sorry, I'm gonna see if we can mute everybody. If everybody can mute their call really quick, their audio, so we can keep going.
Asher, you're muted now.
Yeah, you muted everybody.
There we go. All right, technology. So Natalie, my question was for you. I mean, you've been a broadcaster, you've written a lot, you've written a column, but writing a book is a big project. How about you? What was it that made you decide that, you know what, I gotta buckle down and put this on paper in the form of a book?
I have 3 books that are currently out and one coming out next year, and each process was different. The first book I co-wrote with a friend at the Washington Post. We were in our late 20s and really feeling constrained by newspapers. We're both newspaper reporters, writing for this general audience, which is great because it's for the masses, but also feeling like we were battling racial issues and, just wanted to think about an audience without thinking about a mass audience. And then the book on the Blackstone Rangers was a book I wanted to read, and I was looking for it and it wasn't there. So that's how I ended up writing it with Lance Williams. And the South Side was a little bit more reluctant. I was actually trying to write a book about soap operas, and my agent was all on board for it. Like I can go on and on about why soaps are so important to popular culture and advancing popular thought on social issues. So my agent was like, I think that might be a really hard sell. And she was pushing me to write about Chicago. And I was like, no, I'm not really interested in that. And then I thought about it some more, and that's, it was really based on my reporting, synthesizing it into a thesis about segregation. So yeah, just a very, I was at different stages of my life for all of these books. And I would say that had an influence as well. And then the fourth book that's coming out is actually a play that's being published by Haymarket. And sometimes it's just a story that speaks to you. And I just felt like I want to write a play. I've never had this desire to write the great American novel because I don't think I would be good at it. And a play seemed more accessible, not to say that playwriting is easy, but coming from writing radio scripts, it's actually a very nice bridge because the NPR training books say things like, think of your scripts as a 3-act play, and some other analogies, and you're writing for the ear in a play, just like you are in audio, because you don't have visuals. So I took a class. I wasn't arrogant enough to think I could just do it. And that class gave me the confidence to feel like I knew what I was doing. And then that play is actually based on something, it's inspired by a news event. And then to, drama it up, I set it in Chicago in a city council race.
John, as Natalie mentioned, I mean, she's written several books. You've written a bunch of books. Thinking back to the first one, though, when you got down to sitting down to write it, what really pushed you to the point where you're saying, you know what, this is going to be a book?
I want to pick up on something Natalie said about feeling like you have the confidence to do it, because I went through 3 or 4 book ideas that I didn't have the confidence to do and that I abandoned, and or I couldn't sell. I tried to and couldn't. And some of them I look back on and think, man, I wish that I had the guts to quit my job or to do this. I didn't have kids back then. I could have just done it on the side. I really wish that I had the courage to do it earlier on, but you can't go back and tell your younger self to be more confident. You just got to I'm glad that I got to the point where I had enough confidence to at least try. And that's what it boils down to. I was sitting talking to my wife. I was reading Seabiscuit when it first came out. And I said, I wish I could write a book like Seabiscuit. Like Lou Gehrig it has a lot of the same elements. You've got sports writers who covered this back in the day. You can go back and read their clips, but you can write a much bigger story that's really about the tragedy of a young man dying in his prime, right? And I could have just kept talking, yeah, big shot, why don't you do it? And that, for the first time, I felt ready to try. And I then spent a year working on a proposal. And, we haven't talked about this yet, but like having an idea that's actually marketable, right, that you can sell, that somebody's going to say, yeah, there's an audience for that book, especially for your first time. That really makes a big difference. Some of those book ideas I had in the past, they weren't exactly going to, be big sellers, and that made it harder to get somebody behind me. But, a book about Lou Gehrig, there's kind of a built-in audience for that. Publishers can see some dollars, and that of course also helped give me the push to try it. So I think, confidence, and it just took, maybe I just had to be old enough. I had to have written enough newspaper stories to feel like I had the confidence that maybe I could figure out how to write a book.
And John, to follow up on that point, I mean, one of the things Natalie said was she was looking for something she wanted to consume, something she wanted to read that didn't exist. So she decided to write it herself. In terms of marketability, when you were thinking about some of these books that you eventually published, was it more about what you wanted to write about, or did you have to balance? How much was the balance between what was going to be marketable versus what you actually wanted to write?
Yes, it's both. It's all of those things. You're going to live with this book for years. Some of these books took me 5 years, and you're going to live with it the rest of your life. You're going to be talking about it the rest of your life. You better be passionate, because you're not going to get rich on any of these. I'm making same kind of money I would have made if I'd stayed at the newspaper probably. And you got to be passionate about it. And, but it does help if it's something that you can sell, because, money's nice, and you got to pay the rent still.
Evan, how about you? In terms of, your first stab at writing a book, talk a little bit about that balance between marketability and having a passion for the subject matter that you were going to tackle, and, making sure that you could complete it. What was going through your head as you were, starting that first book?
Hey, I am with SPJ, and I'm not sure that Evan is here yet. I think he's having some technical difficulties.
Okay, great.
Hopefully he can get here soon.
Okay, well, I'm going to throw that to Gary then. You know, as John was talking about, you know, you're going to have to talk about this for the rest of your life. So when you sat down to write, did that ever go through your head in terms of, as you're researching, as you're you know, starting to build out you know, the threads that you're going to carry through this book, about, you know, having to carry that subject matter through the thread of your life for the rest of your life and talking about it and having that passion for it? How important was that for you?
Well, I feel like I'm sort of playing amateur hour to the professionals on this panel. I have to be honest and say I didn't think about marketability at all, which I know sounds a little ridiculous, but I mean, I had a story that I had to get out of my system.
It was like
And
therapy.
so whether it was going to sell or not, I had to sort of write it down. And what happened for me was I was so traumatized by what had happened with the government in DC that I ended up sort of taking refuge in my childhood memories, which is how this other memoir, Newsboy, which has just come out, came to the fore. So I never set out to be a professional writer, and so I guess I differ from the other panelists in that regard. You know, it was just something again that I sort of needed to get out there.
Got it. Natalie, I know you talked a little bit about this, but you know, you've authored books and you've co-authored books. How different is the process when you're working with somebody on a book itself?
So with the first book, Deconstructing Tyrone, I wrote it with a very close friend. I don't think I didn't even know what I wanted to write about. Neither one of us did. It was just like, we got to do something different from newspapers. So I didn't have the confidence to do that by myself. And she was also a writer for the style section in the Post, and I was hard news. So I had to undo a lot of like, yes, you can put first person in, you know, the things that we're taught with journalism. So it was a really good balance where I felt like she pushed me as a writer, and how we landed on the topic, you know, was just based on continuing to talk and to brainstorm. But it was, you know, we were thinking, I mean, I actually agree, if I could take a sidebar with what Gary is saying, you have to play the role with the publisher. They aren't going to take a book if you don't have marketability. But that said, I think that you shouldn't think about audience or marketability when you're writing, because then you will change what you write and you won't write your truth or write whatever it is that you feel like you have to get out. So I have felt that way. Although with the first book, there was a certain aesthetic that we were trying to go for. So this was, you know, we started working on this, you know, the early 2000s. So we were like, okay, you know, like our demographic, Gen X hip hop heads who love the Roots, and Dave Chappelle was a lot different back then. But that would, like, there was just a certain aesthetic that we thought people would recognize themselves in with reading it. You know, neo soul was kind of out then, you know, thinking about the conscious hip hop that we were consuming. And so that's what was motivating us. While with the Stones, my partner Lance knew so many of the guys so I didn't have the access, but I knew the research. Like, okay, we gotta get these court records. And he's an academic, but you know, it's different. So I was able to zoom out and say, you know, this is a bigger story that actually has like national, international implications. So let's hit these archives. So that's how we were able to help each other. So I would say both of those experiences, I couldn't have done it alone. And by the time the South Side came, you know, I wasn't looking for a co-writer. I felt strongly about the content that I could do it by myself.
John, I want to go back to one of the things.
Oh, yeah, sure. Just to let you know, we have Evan with us now.
Oh, okay, great. Well, let's go to Evan then. Really, hey, Evan, how are you? So I was asking everybody kind of that first moment when they knew they wanted to sit down and write a book, and what was sort of the thought process in terms of you coming to the conclusion that I have a story to tell. This is a story that I want to be connected to. This is a story I want to tell. and it's a story that I think people will want to read. It'll be marketable. Talk about that moment for you, is when you sort of, it came into focus that you wanted to be able to put this book to paper and get it out there, and what that felt like, and what through your mind as you were doing it.
Okay, first off, forgive the lateness on my reply. I mean, tardiness or whatever. But anyway, I was actually working on another book about, many of you kind of already know that throughout journalism school and shortly thereafter, I was a bouncer in a couple of nightclubs in the city. So, I was already even when I was still doing it, that people should know about this insider information. But the whole thing with the hockey book kind of like eclipsed that and kind of took off and put that a back burner. So, I mean, when I knew when the hockey book was a thing and a reality, I felt like, like over time, I had been collecting all this information. And, when in the freelance journalism field, like it's a thing where you write a story sometimes and it gets killed and you have all this information, but also you have already written a story and you filed it, but people still reach out. So I already had all this information, and little did I know, my co-author at the same time, what I was even knowing, was wanted to write a hockey book and also had been collecting all this information. So see, it all started with a tweet, honestly, because I saw a tweet saying like, hey, someone wants to pay me to write a book about hockey culture, and I DM'd her and was like, hey, like I literally was thinking the same thing. Like, let's make this a crossover event. It could be dope. And here we are. Pub day was last week, and here we are.
Very good, very good. One of the questions I know people are going to wonder about is, what do you do first? I mean, once you've come to the conclusion that you want to write a book, I'm sure there's different ways to go about this, but John, tell us, do you write a small treatment? Do you shop it around? What do you do first? What's the first thing you should do if you do want to write a book?
I think the first thing you got to do is read and see what else is out there, and then maybe make contact with key sources, see if you can get them to cooperate, and see if, how strongly you feel about it after you start doing some reporting. And then you got to start working on a proposal, which, my first proposal was 130 pages long. It took me a year to write. They've gotten shorter because I feel like I don't have to prove quite as much about, because I'd never written a book. Nobody knew whether I could do it. 130-page proposal might help convince them that I've got enough material, at least, even if I don't have the skills. So it's really just about selling yourself. But if you can lock up key sources, if you can show that you found an area that a book is needed because your research shows there hasn't been a book on this subject, and you've got the connections to do it, you've got the sources, you've got new materials, it's a sales document basically, and you're convincing someone to give you money to write this book.
And, I know one of the things that has always been a problem for me is I'm too busy, right? Work takes too much time, family takes too much time. Getting to a book, I imagine, would take a whole other person to be able to do. So I'm going to go through each of you. Talk a little bit about that balance. I know we touched on it a little bit, but Gary, first, you're working and you feel the need, you have to get this out there. What was that like? What was the balance like? Did you work after you finished your work, or did you work early in the morning? How did it work out for you in terms of being able to commit the time that it took?
Well, I had the good fortune of, I had just left the West Coast and moved to the East Coast. So I was working with clients of mine on the West Coast, which gave me a head start in the morning. Without that, I think I would have been in big trouble. And I also had, my kids were, in elementary school at the time. So they were relatively docile. If I'd had middle schoolers, I would have been in really big trouble. So yeah, but there was no balance. It was, there were days when it was all writing and the client sort of took the hindmost, and other days where, the law practice took it over. And so, I tried to set, guidelines and say, okay, I'll write from, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., but, it rarely worked out that way.
Evan, how about you? You got to unmute, sorry. One more time.
It was a lot. Sorry, it was a lot. Like at the time, having the entertainment beat at the Sun Times, being a single father, and I mean, I guess for me, I would write for an hour in the morning, and write for an hour in the evening, and maybe on weekends I'd have my laptop out, but I have it unplugged so it could go out, because if I get locked in some writing, I'll be there for 4 or 5 hours, and that's probably not good in any way, shape, or form, but but also I had a co-author, but at the same time we wrote, if you know anything about our book, we wrote some pretty heavy stuff. And I talked about, for instance, in high school, a teammate called me a racial slur, and my co-author, dealt with being a victim of sexual assault. So we talked about a lot of heavy stuff, and that we did take time, and there was times where in the writing process where I took like a couple weeks off. I had like a buffer to finish up and everything, but over time, like I guess like any free time I had, like 5-10 minutes, I jot things down. So it never was like I gotta get this book and go crazy. It was always has time and space to get things done.
Mm-hmm. Natalie, how about you? Was it challenging to balance the day job with setting aside that time to write?
So with the first 2 books, I was single and childless. I started the third proposal the same. And with the first book, I quit my job and used some savings. I was like, I can do this. I know I won't be able to do this later. And then with the third book, through that process, I got married and got stepchildren, then got pregnant. And I did have a 3-month leave from WBEZ, but I was also gathering tape to do an audio documentary that was off of it as well. I think that what was key to the Blackstone book, as well as, and even more so with the South Side, is that I wasn't coming home from work and putting on a different brain to write about Greek philosophy. So I was already in the same headspace about the city, neighborhoods, right? All the things that are layered. So I think that helped. And every writer has to figure out what works. Are you a morning person? Do you need to do it after the kids go to bed? If you're in a relationship, how do you balance? And it may not look the same every day, but it's, I think, a little bit of trial by error to figure out what works. Maybe it's weekends, maybe it's only at night because you have all the kids' activities, but there is no perfect answer for balancing.
So if you had the choice, for example, to write a book, because you've written several here now, write a book while working, or if you had the option to take leave, for example, and just focus in and only write, what would you choose?
I mean, that's pretty obvious. Who wouldn't want to leave? So you don't have to do your work. But that's not always possible. Will your job let you? They might. Like my former colleague Monica Ang did that. She took some time off. Or maybe you, and also if you take some time off, being very judicious with that time. With the Blackstone book, I took a couple of weeks off, but if your family knows you're off, they think that you're just off. So you've got to set some boundaries about what it is that you want to do. I would love, I'm not in a position to do this now, but I would love to go to a place like Ragdale or do some type of retreat, probably like in the more intensive writing phases. But there are a lot of myths about how writers work, that we have some cabin in Michigan and we're isolated, and that's just not true for the most part. And
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, one question I had is, what about deadlines, right? We're all used to working under deadlines. That's your drop dead spot. Okay, I got to file by this time, this day. I imagine there is a timeline, unless you're writing 130 page, treatment over a year. But do you have to set like a, okay, I'm going to be finished by this time?
Well, I
I mean,
think
the
it
whole thing.
depends on, well, I would say when you're writing a proposal, give yourself internal deadlines so you can get it done. And then if you sign a book deal, you'll have a deadline. And I would say that the good news for anyone who is thinking that this is a path they want to do, book editors like journalists because we make deadlines. Most authors below their deadlines, they are amazed when we turn them in on time. The Blackstone book, I felt so guilty asking for an extension. It was like only a month. Like it was not a big deal at all. But authors, wow, writers are terrible. So journalists, we don't even understand that concept of blowing deadlines. So you have that in your corner if you want to do this.
Gary, how did you deal with that internal clock of getting through this cathartic writing process that you were going through at that time? Did you set a deadline for yourself to finish the book?
Well, with the first book, I mean, it was driven by the publisher's deadline. Just if I could go back to the previous question, I think the extension of the headspace comment that Natalie made is really critical. For me, because I was sort of translating myself into a different period of my life, and of course this is part of writing a memoir. It was actually useful to have another sort of dimension in your life going on. I think if I had been totally crawled into my childhood, I would have gone nuts. So I mean, having the sort of real life experience of dealing with clients and kids and my wife, and I mean, I think, rather than just sort of retreating would have been really challenging. I mean, I was pretty fortunate that most of my book was written by when I landed at the publisher. I mean, I done a comprehensive outline and at the beginning of the process, but so for me it wasn't that hard meeting a deadline.
Great. This is a personal question because some of us have employment agreements, contracts that give exclusive rights to our works to our employers. For any of the panelists, did you have to negotiate being able to do this kind of work outside of your day job? Were there, sometimes you have clauses that say that they own everything that you produce in perpetuity throughout the universe. Did anybody run into any issues like that while they were writing books?
Only TV people sign contracts. So no.
No.
Well, I had a rather novel twist in my case. The first thing I wrote, well, actually, I did Natalie's progression backwards. The first thing I wrote was a play, and the play actually had to do with. It came out of my time at. I started my legal career as an attorney at the CIA, and I was unfortunately sort of bound up in the Iran-Contra crisis. And when I wrote Artless, my first memoir, I actually had to get pre-publication review by the CIA. So that was an interesting hurdle to build into your time schedule. They gave it to me, but it took a little doing.
One of the things that people ask me a lot is how our work changes us. John, I want to throw this to you first. As you're writing some of your books, were there moments that surprised you as you were researching or writing? That really left a mark on you during the course of any of the books that you've written?
Well, yeah, and I think everybody on this panel can tell some similar story of that. To devote your years of your life to writing a book is an emotional commitment. You live and breathe with these characters. You immerse yourself in their lives. I become part of the family. With the Ali family, I'm juggling all three of his wives at the same time, which Ali's friends would tease me about that I had no idea what I was getting into when I began this process. But you have a responsibility to tell a life story, and that's we all take that responsibility with every story we write, every newspaper story, every magazine story, every radio piece we do. But to do it over the course of years and to publish a book that claims to be the account of a person's life story is just a huge responsibility. And if you don't get emotionally bound up in that, if it doesn't change you as a person, if you don't have deep relationships with these people you're writing about, then you're probably doing it wrong. So it's a big commitment. And Natalie talked before about the embracing the chaos of your life is going to be thrown into chaos attempting to write a book. There's nothing neat and orderly about it. It just, looks that way when you're done. If I turn my camera around, you'll see that I'm working in my laundry room. It looks nice in this direction, but my whole family gets immersed in the books that I'm writing because it's, I'm living and breathing it, and I'm working in the house with the kids coming and everybody, coming in and out of the room. So yeah, it's not just the stories that change your life. It's the journey of being engaged in a story for that long and giving it that level of commitment.
Evan, how about you? During the course of your journey through, were there moments where you found yourself, changing or feeling moved by what you were putting down on paper?
I mean, we weren't really shocked at, the information we gathered and what people told us. I mean, but I guess, for me, it was just like I mentioned earlier about, the racist incident I had as a kid. And, my mom and dad read the book, and that was the first time they knew about it. I mean, because I internalized it, at the time, and I was just like, what's anybody gonna really do about this, right? And I already knew this as a 14-year-old, like how things work in this country. And, I guess like the thing that changed me, like leading up to it, I was just like talking to a couple of people, like friends, family, and everyone else. I felt like a hybrid of excitement and anxiety, because this changed your life. No matter what you do or where you go, people remember that book that you wrote. So that was definitely it. I mean, I guess one of the causes that kind of came out of it, because my 6-year-old daughter plays hockey, and I'm already of the mind like, hey, because of her hair and how she looks, somebody's gonna say something stupid to her. And I don't want her to internalize it like I did. I want her to tell a coach or whoever. So, I mean, it's something I've definitely, thought about over time, and knowing like people will be like, oh, that's the guy who wrote that book. And especially where something is as insular and insidious as hockey culture is, you kind of understand, like, you're going to, get it from all angles.
Natalie, how about you?
And what was the question? I was
Sorry.
typing something in the chat.
Through the course of your journeys through some of your books, were there moments where you started, because the work affects you? Were there moments, or was there any moment that you can tell us about during any one of the books where you really just had to stop and sort of take stock of what you were putting to paper and how it was affecting you?
I don't know if I was affected, but with the Blackstone book, I was starting to feel like, well, first, there are like 4 stages to writing. 1, this is a great idea. 2, this is tricky. 3, this is shit. 4, this is a great idea. So I was at the this is shit point. What am I doing? I'm lost. And then I just hit pay dirt with getting boxes of transcripts from the sister of an El Rukin who was in prison. And it took me 3 months to put them in chronological order. But this was like the aha moment for me, because the El Rukins, which had morphed from the Blackstones, were the first Americans convicted of domestic terrorism in this country. And it's like, people don't really know that. And so and I had the newspapers to give me some of the color in the courtroom when the trial was covered, and also I had the wiretaps, and I had to put that in order. And it was like, I don't even know how the feds did any charges, because there's no way they could have understood the language that they were speaking. I mean, it was English, but the codes. So at that moment, I felt like, wow, this is a global story. And it was the precursor to the Liberty City guys. And PBS had a great documentary on it, the guys who were convicted of trying to blow up the Sears Tower, which was a farce. That case was so flimsy, but so was the El Rukin case. And they tried to tie they tied those together. So there was a link to 9/11. So I think there are always moments when you are doing the research that, you go in and you think, just like with journalism, you go in and you think you know the story and you have a good sense, but then you do some interview that changes it, or you discover something on the journey and you have to pivot. You can't just think, okay, I'm going to keep down this path. And I think that's the beauty of doing this work. And I think journalists are good at pivoting, because this is what we do, and we're open to the story, and we see ourselves as conduits oftentimes for telling complex stories or telling other people's stories.
We've talked a little bit about sort of how you got to the point where you wanted to write a book, what the process was like. What about after the book was published, or the books were published? What are some important things that you think people should know, first-time writers maybe, about after the book goes live, what happens next? What does your life turn into in terms of promoting it and talking about it, and how long that goes on? John, I'll start with you.
I don't know. I mean, it's stressful. You got, your whole life bound up in this thing. And a friend of mine who'd written books said to me, you can't control the reviews and you can't control the sales. You just got to know that you did your best work and that you're proud of what you accomplished, because I hate to say it, but most books don't sell as well as the author thinks they're going to. Every one of my books I thought was going to sell 10 times more than it did, and the book that I thought was going to sell the most sold the worst. And there were, for every book, there's at least a couple of reviews that slap you around, so you dream of the moment when you hold that book for the first time and it's beautiful. That's great. And you got to sell it for all you're worth. The publisher, you can't count on the publisher to sell it. You can't count on anybody but yourself. You got to get out there and work it like, you're selling them by hand out of the trunk of your car. You do everything you can to make it a success.
Evan, how about you? Anything surprise you about what happens after the book is published?
I mean, I'm still new. I'm a weekend. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, like we had an event last Friday, and I took 2 cases of the book and I sold them all. And like this, it was this everybody waiting in line and hearing their story, how they came to know me, whether it was through Twitter or hearing about the book or their stories in hockey. It was cool to hear people like this wanted to talk about something they felt like that was needed. I know I said it was super niche and everything, but yeah, like that moment when I guess it didn't really hit me until my pub day was weird, because I'm thinking it's gonna be in like every bookstore. I was like 4 bookstores and didn't see it, and they were like, it's not here, but you can order it. And I'm like, so all right. So I did finally see it at a store, but someone had pre-ordered it, so I signed it, so I had this whole grand idea. I talked to people like Jonathan Iger, who's someone I leaned on early on in the process, and about how to navigate all this. And I kind of was like, well, this is dope and everything, but I'm just like, man, I wanted to really like walk in and see it. And, like that finally happened, later on in the week where, it actually happened. But it was a cool feeling. And you start to realize that it's not just you. Like pretty much everyone that knows you is proud as fuck of you. Like someone I hadn't seen in years showed up at our event. Like I'm at the event for the book. I'm like, who had been watching me for a while. So yeah, you just kind of realize that not only is friends, family, even my kids walks up to people and be like, my dad wrote a book. So, but it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Gary, how about you? I mean, in your case, you put yourself out there. People are reading, how you felt, and you're really, putting yourself on the line there. In terms of the reaction you get after the book is published, anything that surprised you or did not feel good about the reactions you were getting?
Well, I think what's been most satisfying for me, this book is about a young kid trying to process, a kid in a very quiet suburb trying to process the city of Chicago and the world kind of going to hell in the late 60s and early 70s. And sort of my guide through this process was Mike Royko, talking about journalists being conduits. It was just a real icon of my childhood. And so I actually I summoned up the courage to send the manuscript to Mike Royko's widow. And when she got back to me and said she really enjoyed the book, I mean, that was it. I mean, anything else is just gravy on top of that. So that for me is, has been the great takeaway. In terms of, I did a sort of a multi-coast book tour on my first book, and what amazed me is people who would never give you the time of day, and now that you're an author, will actually start talking to you. I mean, I was actually interviewed by Willie Brown, and I remember pinching myself, going, "Oh my God, I'm talking to Willie Brown." That was just not as cool as Judy Royko, but pretty cool.
Jonathan, how about you? After those books come out, I know we talked a little bit about that, but there's going to be some of those bad reviews, right? I mean, how do you deal with that aspect of it? One of the things that I've been always told when I'm broadcasting is talk to one person. I imagine that's not going to work for you with a book. You got to talk to everybody, and you're going to have to assume there's going to be a variety of reactions to the books that you put out.
I think it might be Natalie's turn. I think
sorry, Natalie. Yes.
He wants to go next. I kind of.
Yeah, Natalie. Yeah, you already did. Yeah, Natalie, go.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I've been lucky to have really good reviews, but for Deconstructing Tyrone, the reader gave a really puzzling review and said that we were middle brow like Oprah. I don't even know what that means. Maybe we weren't Jonathan Franzen enough. Okay, I think when the book comes out, that to me is the fun part. I love going on book tour and talking about it and finding partnerships with people to talk to, and just being out there, because too many authors, you just can't be an introvert. You have to, if you're an introvert, you have to shed that. Too many authors think it's up to their publisher to get them on the New York Times bestseller list. And frankly, you're probably not going to get on the New York Times bestseller list because that's just so rare. And most people on here, I'm assuming, are journalists because this is SPJ. Some writers have to live off of their advance. So if you are working, you don't have to worry about that. But do not take your small advance money and go to Jamaica. Use that money and reinvest it in your book. So with the first book, my partner and I funded our own book tour, because nobody's funding your book tour either. No one's going to fly you to any of these cities. And, we were young, we would go crash with our friends. I mean, we went everywhere from Portland to LA, New York, the South, the Midwest. And because books, I mean, look, there's no books section really in the Tribune. The Sun-Times doesn't review books. We do have the Chicago Review of Books. There is arts coverage here, but book reviewers have really diminished. But that doesn't mean you can't get coverage. So what I learned from that process with the first book is that when you go to town, you can get listed or someone may cover you. So that's how we got a lot of coverage everywhere we went, but it wasn't review coverage. It was, these authors are in town, let's talk to them. So that was a valuable lesson. And I was just taking notes about what else to say. And bookstores have really changed. Like, there were so many more independent bookstores in 2006. A lot of bookstores that I hit are no longer around. And I'm on the board of Seminary Co-op 57th Street Books. And we talk about that we're competing with Netflix. So it's not just that bookstores have gone, but books are just another form of content. And so how do you break the pack with it? If you get a small advance, that is good, because you're getting an advance against royalties. So you want to earn out. So if you get a $5,000 advance, and you sell $10,000 worth of books, you're still going to get that money. If you get a big advance and you don't earn out, you don't owe the money, but it's going to be hard for you to get another book. And I see Stephanie put in the chat that the Sun-Times writes about books. That's not what I was saying. I was saying that there aren't really book sections the way that they used to be. And the coverage is absolutely diminished in the dailies here.
We've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to start looking at some of the questions we've gotten from our participants. First question is for all the authors. How much does an author's platform come into play on whether an agent signs you up? Who wants to try and take that one on first?
I think you got to have a really big platform for it to matter. You know, if you've got 3,000 followers on Twitter, it's not going to move the needle. You got to have, you know, a couple 100,000 maybe before they even, you know, pay you any respect for that. Bottom line, in my experience, has been that the social media stuff doesn't sell books. It makes you feel good that you're getting some reaction, but doesn't translate into sales. Maybe some of the other writers who have more social media followers than I do can offer a different view.
And I don't know who has the most, so I'm going to go to all of you on this one. Gary, your thoughts on this? Does the author's platform come into play on whether or not an agent signs you?
Well, as somebody who had an agent and is no longer operating with one, I should keep my mouth shut. I think it depends on what you're writing. And I think a memoir is very different from the other, reported journalism that we're talking about here. My sense is it's probably more important, for folks who are doing, again, it's, where is your professional headspace? And that kind of dictates where your, how important your platform is.
Evan, your thoughts?
I mean, I'm an avid user of social media, particularly Twitter, and that did come into play. Like, like that me and my co-author had a bit of a following, particularly in, hockey spaces. So that really did, come to play, but we didn't have an agent. I mean, it's kind of just like went around our own and kind of shopped the book and went to different publishers. And honestly, the publisher that took us in, Triumph Books, was like our last one. And that was the publisher I thought, like, yeah, they wouldn't take this book because we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff. And they've written, glowing books about some of the people we discussed in our books. So I was kind of like, I don't know about this, but I think it also played into authors of color and what was going on last summer and people all of a sudden wanting to believe what people of color have been saying for like centuries about what's going on in this country. That played into it too.
And Natalie, how about you? I mean, and when we talk about platform, obviously, you have experience with this. People know you're a credible journalist, and you're writing about something you know about. So I imagine that plays a part into it. But what are your thoughts on how much the author's platform comes into play when it comes to whether or not an agent is interested in you?
Interestingly, when I saw that question in the chat, my mind did immediately go to social media. I started thinking about credibility or expertise in a particular topic. So if you are a reporter who wants to write a book, I mean, and I know these are big papers, but so many people from the Post and the New York Times write very specialized books on national security or intelligence, whatever it is off of their beat. And so they have a platform because they have expertise. So if you are a crime reporter in your local town or you're covering arts, and I think your platform can also be based on what is your expertise and the fact that you are actively writing as a journalist on these topics gives you a platform that I think that often is attractive to agents or publishers.
I imagine that helps you sell the idea, especially if you're a first-time writer, that you can write and you've been covering the subject matter that you want to tackle in a book. That probably plays a part, no?
Yes, I would say that plays a part. And, with social media, it was a big deal at one point if someone with like a really, really big following got a book deal. That's not so unusual now, but that's not typically the kind of followers that most journalists have. So if we're just thinking about our industry and who gets deals, I think it's the expertise, and they do see it as a platform. Oh, you work for this news agency, this news organization, so they see that as your platform.
Yeah, I just want to
question. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I want to add to that. your idea, your story idea is more important always than your platform, or it helps to have some expertise, but story ideas sell. You know, what do you do when you want to get on the front page? You need a good story idea, right? You want to sell a book. I'd never written a book. I wasn't a sports writer, but a biography of Lou Gehrig was a good idea. It hadn't been done. And there was a good reason to do it. So, you know, your idea is your best asset.
Another question from the group here is, do you pitch a proposal first or find an agent first? And how do you find an agent that's a good match with the type of writing you're aiming to do? Anybody want to jump on that one?
The advice that I usually give, and every writer is going to be different, is to find an agent first, because they're going to get you, I believe, a better deal. And when you're looking for agents, look in the acknowledgments of books that you admire or that are similar to yours and reach out. You cannot send your proposal to the major publishing houses without an agent. So my first book, our agent ended up dropping us. And like Evan, the publisher, so we just went the independent route. So independent presses, you don't have to have an agent. Same with, there's some academic presses that do popular work. And so Deconstructing Tyrone, that was the end of the line. Like, that was the last publisher who took us. So I've had a variety, like I've had small, I've had medium size, and then my last book was in a big house, and now the play I'm back, I'm at Haymarket, which is a nonprofit. So I say start off. My advice is to try to find an agent, but if that doesn't work, that doesn't foreclose on your possibility of writing a book.
Got it. Evan, how did that work out for you? Was that a challenge? Because you said you didn't go through an agent, you didn't have an agent, right?
No, I mean, obviously we're journalists and we know a lot of people who've written books, so everyone had a different entry to writing books. I knew like someone like Fred Mitchell, who was at the Tribune for a long time. He didn't, for some of his books, or I don't think he had a literary agent. And some people were like, hey, you need an agent. And we're just kind of like, well, let's try it this way. I mean, we did kind of like, it was a Hail Mary, you know, and it was, like I said, like literally the last publisher that we had on our personal internal list was like, let's do this book. so it's, the advice varies. It can work for one person, it can not work for someone else. So it's definitely a big old crapshoot.
Got it. Jonathan, Gary, did you guys want to jump in here?
Yeah, I would just say that I always tell people, remember that the agent works for you. If you've got a good book idea, agents need to make money. They need to sell books. Don't feel like you need to, don't be coward by them. You know, you've got something valuable to them. Be bold and obviously, it's hard to get books sold. It's getting harder all the time. The industry's miserable right now, but go in there with some swagger. You've got a valuable idea for a book. They're gonna be working for you, and they're taking 15% of your money. So make them work for you if they agree to take you on.
I wish I'd followed Jonathan's advice when I first hired my agent. I'll just leave it at that. So.
Very good. Another question for all of you. How do you balance memoir writing against maintaining a more guarded journalism persona? Does anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, I guess I'm the memoir writer on one of the memoir writers on the panel here, so I'll take that one on. You have to be true to your own, reality. And I think there's a tendency in memoir writing, in recent memory to sort of say, okay, how dysfunctional was my life? And that seems to be the benchmark for the marketability of a memoir. The less guarded you are, the better in that respect. I think you just have to find what your level of comfort is. I ended up changing in Newsboy. I ended up changing some names because I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. And then after I did my galleys went out, I changed some more names after I got some responses back. So I was perhaps not as guarded, I should have been more guarded than I was. But I mean, ultimately, you have to decide, how much of yourself do you want to, put on display, and what's your level of comfort there.
Anybody else want to jump? I mean, I know a lot of the subject matter that you guys cover is very journalistic in nature, but was it something that you thought about in terms of how you were going to project yourself? I know, Natalie, you talked about some of the stylistic changes in writing that you make when you're writing a book, and allowing yourself, the latitude that you might not have as, a straight reporter.
A good editor can help you with that. After I turned in my draft of The South Side, which had some, sometimes people call it a memoir. I think my instinct is always to recoil at that, because that feels too navel gazing for me. And I love memoirs, but it's like, no, who cares about that? But obviously the first person was in it to help connect the dots. But when I turned in my first draft, my editor was like, I want more here. I want more of you here. Like, she was able to pinpoint. So that helped me, even though I had come a long way from being reluctant to insert my voice. A good editor can help you.
Excellent. We're running out of time, so I want to go around the panel. One last question. Any advice to aspiring writers who want to try this for the first time? Gary, I'll start with you, and then we'll go around to the other three, and then we'll close it up.
If you feel compelled to tell your story, find a way to tell it. I mean, I think that it's as simple as that. And make the commitment. Take the leap, and it's worth it.
Evan, how about you?
It's simple. Is start writing. I mean, you're gonna have to start at some point, right? I mean, so you just start right away. Wherever little story that you had that popped in your head, jot it down, and you can go back to it.
Excellent. Jonathan?
I think so far we're all saying the same thing, but I say, give yourself permission. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission.
Very good. And then Natalie, I'll give you the last word on this one. Your best advice.
I would say start workshopping your ideas, publishing them as an essay, writing about that topic so you can put that into your proposal packet. Also, spoken word can be a venue, like The Moth, or especially if it's a memoir, like talking about it. And then you're getting audience reaction. So workshopping your ideas in some sort of public space, whether that's written, audio, or on a stage.
Awesome. Well, that closes out the time we have for tonight, but I want to thank all of our panelists this evening. What a fabulous discussion. I know I learned a lot. I hope everybody else learned a lot, but I want to thank you guys all for taking the time to speak to the audience here and take part in this panel. Jonathan Eig, Natalie Moore, Evan Moore, Gary Cole, thank you guys all for being here. And for all the participants, thank you so much for your great questions, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.